Well, let me put it this way. There's a little bit more historically to this. For example, we can go back to the period 1918 when Ukraine declared its independence on January 22nd. There were not a single Jewish political party, and there were a number of them, even though that Jews were a part of Centralna Rada, the Central Rada, the body that essentially was in charge of Ukraine. But not a single Jewish political party endorsed Ukrainian independence. You can go back to the period of Khmelnytsky, the Cossack period. One of the problems was that according to under the Tsar and later on even under the Soviets for some time, the Jews were relegated to that portion of the empire which was Ukraine, and they were Ukrainians and Jews were essentially neighbors. Now, there's an old adage that says good fences make good neighbors, but in this case, because they were neighbors, they were in constant contact with each other. Ukrainians essentially tilled the field. They were farmers. They were peasants. The Jews were merchants. Very often, Jews were called upon to be the middleman between the Poles and the Ukrainians. For example, if the Ukrainian farmer had to produce for the landowner who was the Pole, okay, the person who got involved in order to make sure that the quota was met, okay, was the Jew, okay, because he was a merchant, all right, he was constantly the middleman. He had, it's not a fairy tale that many Jews held keys to the Ukrainian churches and insisted on payment before they would open up the churches. So this is something that dates back to, there are a number of books that have been written by both Ukrainians and Jews on this subject. It is very unfortunate because both Ukrainians and Jews had it bad under the Tsar, under the Poles, and under the Soviets. But yet because they were in different strata of society, all right, but constantly intermingling, there was a lot of friction, an awful lot of friction. So what transpired is when the Bolshevik Revolution came about, a good portion of the Jewish population sought a change from what the Tsarist regime offered. And they joined, if you look at the list of the early Bolsheviks, you have Trotsky, you have Zinoviev, you have Kamenev. These are all Jewish individuals, all right? They joined the ranks of the Communist Party, all right? In Ukraine, when the Bolsheviks tried to impose communism in Ukraine, after they defeated Petliura and the army of the Ukrainian National Republic, what transpired is they needed Ukrainian communists, but they couldn't find many Ukrainian communists. In fact, we often refer to Mykola Khvylovy as a preeminent Ukrainian communist. But the fact of the matter is that Khvylovy changed his name. He was a Russian who changed his name to a Ukrainian name so that it would appear that, I'm not suggesting that there were no Ukrainians who joined the Communist Party. There were, but there were very few. So the work that had to be carried out by the Secret Service, the Russian security forces, the Soviet security forces, were carried out by the Jews because the Jews joined the Communist Party as well as the KGB in droves. And since they resided in Ukraine mostly, the bulk of the security forces in Ukraine were made up of Jews. That's why the Jews, they didn't give the directives to conduct the famine, but they implemented it. The directives came from Moscow. There's no doubt about that. But somebody had to carry it out. And in fact, in one of his letters to Ukraine, to Lazar Kaganovich in August of 1932, Joseph Stalin was very unhappy with the situation in Ukraine because even the party members, the party, the presidium of the party was not doing its job. And he says, we need to make changes because these Ukrainians are not good communists at all. All right. And that was one of the first instances where he essentially exposed his motive, that we will use the fact that there is a famine going on, but we will use it to perpetrate a genocide against the Ukrainian people. And he put Lazar Kaganovich in charge. And Kaganovich carried it out. I'm not suggesting, well, Kaganovich was a henchman, so there's no doubt about his evilness. Now, what do my Jewish friends say about this? Okay? They say that Lazar Kaganovich was a Jew. He was an animal, all right? But we, Jews, do not call him a hero. For us, he is not a Jew anymore, all right? Consequently, they don't take any responsibility for what people like Lazar Kaganovich said. I have a good friend who's the current chief rabbi of Ukraine, Yaakov Bleich. He's a rabbi. He told me this in no uncertain terms, that we do not make heroes of the criminals, the criminal Jews, all right? And so, and frankly speaking, they don't, but they never apologize, all right, for it. And the fact of the matter is that they say we have good people and we have bad people. And frankly speaking, amongst Ukrainians, we have good people and we have bad people too. But now what they're trying to do, this comes from Soviet propaganda, because you would be amazed how much of this that is coming from the Holocaust industry and from the people who are shouting anti-Semitism is coming from what the Soviets used to do and still do, and how much money the Soviets spent in the past. Hitler even made it very important to make films, because propaganda, he said, was just as important as having a serious army. And why the concept of a hybrid war, which Russia is conducting today in South Ossetia, in Transnistria, in Abkhazia. In fact, recently, South Ossetia, which was part of Georgia, announced that they will have a referendum on whether they wish to annex with Russia. And the same thing with Crimea. All of this the hybrid war is predicated on the fact we will freeze a conflict. We will carry out propaganda. All right. After a while, we will hold a pseudo referendum. The referendum, because we will have it under the barrel of a gun, and because of the propaganda, will go our way. Okay. And the world, if you have any doubts at all, I would suggest to anyone who's interested, because this is on television, go to the Security Council, the UN Security Council. There is a permanent representative of Russia to the Security Council. His name is Vitaly Churkін. He is an absolute master. Interestingly enough, he was initially, before he became a diplomat, he was an actor. He played in a number of movies in the Soviet Union. Then they sent him, the KGB sent him to school to learn English, because English was very important. If you're going to carry out propaganda, English is the lingua franca of the world today. All right? Then they told him you have to study history, and he became a master of disinformation. And you watch him at the UN today. He doesn't even, where everyone, the other 14 countries, including China, and China is supposed to be essentially on his side, they are criticizing him, ridiculing him. It doesn't have any effect. He continues. He says, he told me once at a press conference, because I specifically asked about the Second World War and Molotov-Ribbentrop, and he said, the Baltic countries begged the Soviets to come and help them in 1940. Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia. And today he said, just last Thursday, at a session of the Security Council, he said, the problems in Ukraine today are a result of the fact that there was external financial support, meaning American, CIA, support for coup d'etat. He classifies the Maidan as a coup d'etat of taking down Yanukovych, and Russia had to act, okay? And you would be very surprised that there are many people susceptible to this type of disinformation.